RPA does, what a plan is, what it does and doesn't do. Then we'll look at some of the issues that were raised by the community in our kickoff survey related to the environment, to parks and to open spaces, and talk a little bit about how we as professionals see those issues, specifically RPA. And then next I'll introduce our expert panel. So these are people who are professionals in fields related to parks, preservation, stormwater, and give them each a few minutes to share their background and kind of what they're going to be bringing to the discussion. And then finally, we'll open it up for a question and answer phase where anybody can ask questions related to the topics at hand today. Okay, so first things first, what's RPA? Where is Area 11? What are area plans? Who are you people? What is all of us, right? So RPA is the the Chattanooga Hamilton County Regional Planning Agency. Quite a mouthful. RPA is the shortened acronym, or the agency that works for and makes recommendations to the Chattanooga Planning Commission and to Hamilton County Planning Commission. Those are the appointed boards that make decisions on rezonings and other land use decisions that are brought before them, or cases rather. So we make recommendations to them for rezoning cases on whether we think they should approve or deny or something else in between. But we also do research and analysis. We staff the federally mandated transportation planning organization that handles federal transportation funding. And then, as we said before, my team, Community Planning and Design, which Karen heads up, we develop the land use plans for different parts of the city and county. So we just completed one for East Chattanooga, which was Area 3. And before that, we did one for Appison and Ooltewah, broadly speaking, that was Area 12. So a little bit about what plans do and don't do. Plans, first of all, analyze existing conditions. So we look at all sorts of stuff. We look at demographics, the transportation network. We look at the state of jobs and housing. And of course, we look at parks and greenways. Plans provide a community vision for future land development and character. So what does that mean? Again, same kind of thing. We're looking at how do we want to grow as a community related to housing, commercial, institutional, property development, for what are our priorities for transportation and infrastructure and for open spaces. So it's kind of a big, broad vision for about 10 years out for how a place can and should grow with community input. So, and then it guides rezoning decisions. Again, as we said, when a developer or a builder wants to rezone a property, we provide input on whether or not that should be approved or denied. And this plan will be used by us and Planning Commission to help decide whether to approve that request or not. And then the last one, coordinate public infrastructure investments with future growth. So that includes recommendations for roads, bridges, sidewalks, sewer, other kinds of government investments. But what they don't do is ensure funding for those things. So we make recommendations only. RPA doesn't build anything. That's up to groups like TDOT or WWTA to follow our recommendations. We don't build things. We also the plan does not regulate zoning or change zoning. In order for properties to get rezoned by local government, a follow-up zoning study would have to be conducted after a plan, specifically for rezoning and at the request of your council person. So there's a lot of hurdles to get to that point, and we are not anywhere near that right now. And then finally, a plan doesn't directly address social issues like healthcare, affordable housing. We might acknowledge that that's an issue in this area, but it's not the focus. The focus is on land use. So that takes us to where we are today. We're in Area 11, East Brainerd. This is an 11 square mile area that's east of I-75. It's inside the city limits. Of course, we got South Chick there in the southwest and Georgia state line on the south edge. And this is just to the west of the Area 12 boundary, as I mentioned earlier, the plan that was adopted a few years ago. So what's in Area 11? Everybody knows this is the home to Hamilton Place Mall, but it's also home to a lot of long-standing neighborhoods, some that have been here for many, many decades. And also, you know, this area obviously experienced some tragedy last year with the April tornadoes. A lot of work has been done to clean up and rebuild, but we know a lot of families are still struggling in the aftermath of that. So now we're going to talk about our kickoff response. So back in the spring, we had a kickoff event and a corresponding survey to gauge kind of how residents and owners were feeling about East Brainerd. So previous neighborhood plans, like Hamilton Place Community Plan, for example, they had stated goals in that plan document that came out of what the community wanted to accomplish it. And so we asked respondents how important those goals from the previous plans were to them still today. And as you see on those orange arrows, I've kind of coded some of the ones that were related to environment, for example. So protect creeks and streams, protect the tree canopy. There's another one on here on the next slide about protecting hillsides and ridges. So, there's that environmental concern. Some of them are related to mobility and recreation. Let's see, we had one on building greenways to connect parks and other destinations, create more options for biking and walking, build more parks. And then, of course, some were related to stormwater. I think provide better protections rather, to reduce stormwater runoff was on there as well. So we know these issues are not really at the very top of the list for most people. Most people who have given their feedback so far have made pretty clear to us that the number one issue is, road maintenance and traffic congestion, some other issues related to development. But these are issues that are related to natural systems and open spaces that we're hearing consistently being raised as well, kind of in a third place, but still kind of a close third place. So let's do a quick inventory of our parks and open spaces. We know we've got a couple places here that people are using for recreation and play in East Brainerd. So let's start off with Batter's Place. We know that's being run by East Brainerd Athletic Association, kind of nestled in there between a bunch of neighborhoods. There's Jack Benson Heritage Park, which has been open for close to 20 years now. That's a real gem of a public park in this area. And then, of course, Audubon Acres there in the southwest corner, which is privately owned by the Audubon Society, the Chattanooga Audubon Society, but is publicly accessible. So, and one exciting thing to note about Audubon Acres actually is that once the South Chick Greenway is completed, which David here today can speak a little bit better to it than I can. Once that's completed, Audubon Acres will connect to Camp Jordan in East Ridge. And if you wanted to, you could even take the Greenway all the way to the Riverwalk on Amnicola and to downtown. So that's a really neat thing that'll be coming, I think, somewhat soon. And maybe David can give a little clearer explanation of that time frame later on. But something neat that's kind of going to be at the edge of the area here that's going to be a great amenity. So these parks are all fairly spread out in Area 11, and even though some residents are fairly close to them, as you can see on that map, most people have to drive to get to one. But it's a suburban area. There's lots of open space kind of by design too, right? So homes and businesses have large lots with the buildings kind of set back far away. So you've got lots of open space as part of your development pattern. And some divisions have community lots too that can be used for get-togethers and play and that sort of thing. And we know that's kind of becoming a more common feature in newer subdivisions. Developers are kind of responding to that desire. So that's kind of a quick inventory. And then let's take a look at our natural systems too. So what are the state of them, and what's the health of the environment in this area generally? Well, I got some bad news. First of all, the creeks and streams are unfortunately not doing great, despite the best efforts of some pretty hardworking volunteers and public servants. Most of the creeks and streams out here are considered impaired, which means they don't support kind of the typical uses that a creek or stream is, expected to support, like healthy aquatic life, recreation, water supplies for industrial or consumption uses. And the issues that are contributing to that, there's kind of a range of them, but a few of the examples are contamination from sewage, pollution from road runoff, and stream bank erosion. So there's definitely some work to be done on that front. But on the flip side, if you see on that map there, the hatching of the green, that's your tree canopy. So the tree canopy coverage in East Brainerd is pretty high. About 74% of all land has some degree of tree cover. Although there's not much going on, obviously, in Hamilton Place and Gun Barrel in the commercial areas. But also a lot of trees were felled by the tornado last year, and we don't really know, to what degree those will get replaced, because for one thing, rebuilding on a lot that has the same exact zoning as the structure that used to be there, that doesn't necessarily trigger the landscaping requirement for something to replace there. So it remains kind of to be seen if we'll see tree canopy kind of grow back in those places that were hit hard by the tornado. So ultimately, why do we care, right? We want to take care of the environment because it looks nice and we're supposed to, right? But the environment also takes care of us with what are called ecosystem services, right? So we get lots and lots of utility from our creeks and streams and trees. Healthy creeks and streams help control floodwaters better than unhealthy ones. Trees filter pollutants and absorb stormwater. Trees keep our homes and communities cool because pavement does just the opposite, right? Some of you guys have heard of the urban heat island effect, where a lot of pavement can actually make the ambient temperature of an area higher. So, which is the case at Hamilton Place Mall, and trees can help mitigate that. Trees and streams both have psychological benefits. This is proven that just being around nature helps lower your stress and blood pressure. So there's lots that the environment does for us that is also consequently really expensive to replicate or replace with engineering. So it's really kind of best for us to try to take good care of the land and be good stewards of it so that it can take care of us. So that's kind of a quick rundown of the state of things of parks and of natural systems. And now I want to talk just briefly, well, not too briefly, but a little bit briefly on flooding, because I know that is definitely a big headache for a lot of people out here. So I thought I'd take a couple minutes to explore the root causes of flooding as we see it as planners in this area. So 1 is geography, 2 is impervious surfaces, and 3 is the stormwater network. So I'm gonna break those down one by one. We can kind of get a sense of what's going on here. Why are we flooding so much in certain areas? So first off, geography. What you're looking at is the special flood hazard area of area 11. So actually, let me backtrack and just say that all the water in this area is part of the lower South Chickamauga Creek watershed. So watershed is a fancy term for basically a specific area of land where all the water flows into a common outlet, like a stream or a lake or an aquifer that's underground. This area specifically, though, we've got several water bodies that are mostly flowing into the South Chick Creek stream down there in the southwest corner. So what you're seeing on the map, though, is a breakdown of kind of the different categories of how stormwater is broken down by FEMA. So you've got the floodway around the creek or river, and that has to remain clear to allow floodwater to move. That's Mackey Branch down there in the center, and then Ryle Springs kind of on the east side. The darkest color would be the floodway, right? And then you have a flood, the 100-year floodplain and the 500-year floodplain. So if you're not familiar, 100-year floodplain, it's kind of a complex concept, but in a simple, I guess in the most simplistic way of describing it is that it's a really intense event that has it's supposed to have a 1% chance of happening in a given year. And then a 500-year flood would be something that happens or has a chance of happening just 0.2% in a given year. So they're really intense flood events that are kind of predicted to be somewhat rare. Something interesting about this area, though, is that because about 17% of all the land in Area 11 is part of this special flood hazard area, you really need to think about the homes that are already built in this space and what are the consequences for the homeowners and the risks that are involved with owning property that's in this area. So, for example, a house that's located in a 100-year floodplain has a 26% chance of being flooded during a 30-year mortgage period. That's kind of a high risk, or maybe it depends on what your risk tolerance is. And then a house in a 500-year floodplain has a 6% chance. This, something to be aware of, definitely. But the geography here is that we've got a pretty large area of land where water naturally is already flowing. Number 2 is impervious surfaces. So that includes roads and parking lots and anything that doesn't let water filter down to the soil. I guess that means buildings too, right? So for the big difference between how water flows, trickles down and away with impervious surfaces versus something that is pervious, like most anything else, grass, soil, any kind of natural surface, is that with impervious surface, when it rains, anywhere between 70 and 90% of that water, anywhere between that 70 and 90% of that stormwater filters down. So just 10 to 30, I'm sorry, I'm getting my terms mixed up. Let me start over. An impervious surface, 79 to 90% of the water stays on the surface, but within, did I get it right? This is where I messed up on my rehearsal. Sorry, y'all. So pervious is where the water will flow down, but impervious, about 3 times as much of the water will actually stay on the surface. So the water has to go somewhere, right? And when you have an impervious surface, it just sits. With Area 11, about 16% of all the land is actually impervious. So mostly that's around the commercial districts, right? Hamilton Place, Gun Barrel, Shalford Road, and East Brainerd to a lesser extent. I'm going to show you a graph here. So this was a 2020 study by researchers at UTC that looked at urbanization of Hamilton County watersheds from 1986 to 2016. So they found that lower South Chick Creek watershed had the largest percent increase in impervious development compared to the neighboring watersheds. So just over 100% increase in, what is that, about 30 years. So the story here is that when you rapidly build out an area with a lot of pavement, again, the pavement changes the hydrology of the watershed. It changes where the water can go, and the water has to go somewhere. So that's part 2. The third part is our previous regulations. So this is a really complicated looking map of our municipal separate stormwater system. That's the MS4. That's the system that handles, just like most other municipalities in the country, it handles our stormwater. So the lines on there are different categories of conveyances that collect the stormwater, and then they drain it straight into our streams and rivers. It's separate from sewers, but a lot of times it runs parallel to the sewer lines. And then the other component here, those circles, the different colors, are our storage basins. So things like detention ponds and retention ponds. And there's another category called a naturalized basin. Basically, they're just engineered depressions in the ground, and they temporarily hold a lot of rainwater and then release it slowly so that the creeks and streams and our conveyances aren't inundated with water in a storm event. So they really reduce the flooding, and they improve the quality of the stormwater as it flows into the water bodies. Past regulations, though, previous to 2014, allowed a lot more volume of stormwater and stormwater pollutants to enter our streams and stormwater systems. So we had a new system that we adopted in 2014, but the previous system, for example, conveyances, those are the lines that carry the stormwater, they're supposed to transport stormwater, but in some places here around, like in Hamilton Place Mall, they're also supposed to provide the detention as well as and conveying it. So kind of a convoluted concept, but basically there were some concepts in those regulations that were not particularly efficient or definitely had some problems. The problem now, though, with these new regulations for conveyances and detention ponds is that those things don't get triggered when a builder redevelops the site. So unless, for example, like they're adding more pavement, like private roads or parking, or if the site is bigger than an acre. But neither of those things is very frequent. So we have new regulations in place, but they're not always being applied. So those are kind of the 3 high-level, root causes that we're seeing that are contributing to the flooding problem out here. That's it for my presentation. I hope it wasn't too long-winded or convoluted about things, but I hope it gives everybody a better sense of, why flooding is happening out here, how healthy our environment is, how local parks and open spaces are working for us. I guess just to close it out, trees, floodplains, creeks, parks, greenways, all these things provide benefits to the community, and people need open space and recreation opportunities for physical health, mental health, lots of other reasons, but they're also impacted by population growth and new development. So that's kind of one of the things that we want to look at today is how can we balance those 2 different needs. Yeah, that's all I've got on that front. So today we're going to introduce, or I guess now we're going to introduce today's panelists. I'm going to give each panelist a few minutes to introduce themselves and explain their perspective on natural systems and open space as it relates to here and kind of regionally or nationally. What are we seeing? What are the trends? Panelists, when I say your name, if you can just say hi, make sure you're unmuted. That way your window will pop up and everybody can see your face. So first off, we have David Johnson with Trust for Public Land.
Hey, everybody.
We have Matt Whitaker of WMWA Landscape Architects.
Hi, everybody.
And then we have Josh Rogers. He's with the Stormwater Division of Chattanooga Public Works.
Yep. Good evening.
So, David, I'm going to let you start us off.
Thanks, I appreciate it. So at the Trust for Public Land, we protect land and build parks for people. We've been working in the Chattanooga area for over 25 years. What that looks like here is land that gets added to national parks. It's working with nonprofit partners who can manage land permanently. It's working with community organizations to improve public spaces. It's doing all these different things. But what all of those have in common is a group of people who want to make their community better. They organize and they advocate for parks and open space that they feel are important. So without that, we're not able to go in and bring additional resources and do our work. We really rely on citizens to guide and direct our work. So obviously, there are just a few public spaces in Area 11. Heritage Park, which is kind of the most prominent multi-use public space in the area. It provides a lot of opportunities, but it also sees a lot of use. So there's clearly demand for parks and public space in that area. We also discussed Audubon Acres, which is private, but is a conservation organization. Audubon Acres is where my son went to Forest Pre-K, so it offers a lot of programming to allow people to experience nature. Eric, can you go to the next slide? So the Trust for Public Land offers a lot of information to people, especially residents. One of those is called ParkServe. So if you'd like more information just to see your community, what parks are nearby, you can go to parkserve.org. And what it shows you is parks that are in dark green, and it shows you the walk shed to those, which is in light green. And then the purple areas of different hues show areas where new parks could go. There are places where there are gaps in the park system. And you can actually use tools on parkserve.org to see how many people would be within a 10-minute walk of a new public park. You can go ahead to the next one, Eric. So you mentioned earlier South Chickamauga Creek Greenway. Here's the original 1996 master plan. We worked on this, one of our first projects. And I'm using this as an example to talk about how complex and occasionally slow development of greenways and trails can be. So from 1996 till now, we've been working to build South Chickamauga Creek, and we're still not done. So it's a very slow process. A lot of our work has been to acquire properties and easements for the city of Chattanooga, so that when resources are available to build those, we're able to have all the property rights secured. Each of these sections, that might be a mile and a half, those take several years to complete. The permitting is very complex, obviously near the creek, and it can take a while to get all the property rights secured. So as you mentioned, there's certainly the opportunity once the core of South Chick is complete to create new connections. We're specifically talking with Audubon Acres to see how their property, which is on the right side of that map, could get tied into to Camp Jordan, where it currently starts. That involves, not one municipality, but two. So East Ridge is another one of our partners. We have to work with a lot of different organizations to make sure that we're helping them in the way they want. So that's a very brief overview. My information is available. So please check out those resources at parkserve.org, and I'm done.
All right. Thanks, David. Matt, you are up next.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Matt Whitaker. I'm a landscape architect with WMWA Landscape Architects here in Chattanooga. I'm a part of a 4-person firm that's been in Chattanooga since 2013, but I've been practicing landscape architecture for more than 20 years. The firm itself has done a variety of projects around Chattanooga. You've probably seen some of them, but we do everything from planning down to kind of minute garden planting designs. One of our smallest little parks in St. Elmo, it's probably about 200 square feet. We've also worked on 1,200 acre master plans for the University of Tennessee and West Tennessee. My presence here today is really related to what we do as landscape architects. We take a very broad look, but everything we've talked about really landscape architects deal with, either in terms of protecting those resources, creating those resources, modifying those resources, figuring out how to integrate housing and new developments with natural systems so that we are managing stormwater, maintaining canopy, and maintaining quality of life. So all of the things that really Eric touched on are things that we deal with as a profession, and it's many of the things that us as a firm have also dealt with here in Chattanooga. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And last but not least, we have Josh.
Hey everyone, Josh Rogers. You can see from my professional photo there that I like to spend time outdoors. That's kind of what makes Chattanooga home for me. My wife and I moved here in 2008 after we got our master's degrees. Mine was in wildlife and fisheries, and so being an outdoorsy guy doing wildlife and fisheries with a focus in hydrology, somehow I ended up in stormwater. But it's been really beneficial for me. I've learned a lot while I've been here in the last 13 years. Currently, my role now is a water quality supervisor. I handle the day-to-day operations of our stormwater control measure inspection and maintenance, municipal industrial inspections, look at conservation, stream restoration projects, buffer mitigation. I work closely with the land development office on stormwater controls, oversee the water quality fee, as well as the credit programs. We also have a lot of innovative programming that we do with the city, whether that's the city's Green Grants program for non-residential, or looking at residential programs available for Rain Smart, which does rain barrels, rain gardens for single family residential. We also have Supportscapes, which is a new program. So there's a lot of different things that we're trying to do. The GROWN program, Growing Resilient Neighborhoods, is something we did last year, prompted by the tornado, because we know that we lost a lot of tree canopy. And so the city started a program where we were offering free trees, 4 free trees for individuals in the tornado area, 2 trees for individuals outside of that across the city. And our hope is that we would continue to do that. So constantly trying to come up with ways that we can address water quality through all kinds of means from all directions.
I'm muted. Sorry, rookie mistake. Thanks, guys. Great introductions. I'm gonna take a look over here at our Q&A panel to see if we got any questions. I don't think we've got anything just yet, but please feel free. I've got a couple tee-off questions to get the conversation going. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask, just please send it into our Q&A box there, and we'll get you. So I want to go back to talking about our parks. So we know that we've got limited funding. We're struggling to maintain. We've got 90 plus parks in the city of Chattanooga, but we also need input from people on how to move forward with that limited funding. What are the priorities? What are the needs from the community with those spaces? So I guess this question is a little bit more for David, and it might be a little bit for Akosho too, if you'd like to speak up. But how do we make sure that residents' priorities are heard when it comes to our parks and open spaces? You know, we want to know what people want out of their parks. What do they like? What do they not like? What kind of experience do they want? Are there other means of opportunities going forward, such as like a parks master plan or other means that people can engage with?
Well, that got teed up for Okoshua, I feel like, but
Okay.
certainly there are very limited resources, and the city has to be very strategic where it invests. And so, TPL provides a lot of data to the city related to parks and people. But sorry, that's my son Felix. But what it doesn't do is show the community's desire for those places. So that brings me back to how are residents organized? How are they making it very clear to policymakers about what's important to them? How are they prioritizing park space in their area so they can use it daily? The communities that are best organized and advocate hardest for what they want to see are the ones that we respond to and the city responds to. And so, when there are so many people and so many gaps in the park system, it really does take a lot of organization for communities to get prioritized.
And we are just starting the kickoff for our Parks and Greenways master plan. Matt's actually on the team. We hired Design Workshop out of Austin, Texas. They're going to help draft that plan. But we want to address some of the issues that David just brought up, that we don't currently have a strategy for how we respond to all the requests, because we don't have a problem with people coming to the city with letting us know what they would like to see in their parks. The issue is that how do we decide who gets what and when? So we want to, with this new master plan, have a better strategy of how we prioritize our park investments. And again, so that we don't overtax our parks maintenance system. Because they are already overstretched, and that's why they're reluctant to expand our park system, because they don't feel like they can adequately take care of the system we have. So we're going to look at ways in this master plan of maybe reallocating resources to better serve the community. It could be just moving stations around so that there's less of a time wasted for the crews going between the 106 parks we have. We're also looking at maybe having a total asset management plan as part of our parks master plan, so that we know it's an ongoing issue, that people have these wants and desires, and we want to meet that, but we have to be strategic because we compete for capital dollars, just like transportation does and every other department. So it's really hard sometimes for parks to differentiate themselves from, because the priority tend to be pavement. So it's hard to compete with potholes.
Yeah. Akosha, what's a good way for people to keep their ear to the ground for when the public engagement effort kicks off for the park master?
We're working currently on creating our engagement plan.
Okay.
And because we want it to be robust, we're going to have a steering committee. So we want to have the council people nominate a person from each district, because we do want to make sure that there's a balance. Because again, there are certain communities that are very well organized, and again, they know how the system works, so they tend to get more from the system. Whereas there's communities that might not have that same network available, and so tend to be under-resourced. So we want to compensate for that by making sure that we have representation from the entire city, and that we, engage the key stakeholders that are really involved in our parks and open spaces. Our foundations have been fantastic. I think they're a part of the reason why we have such a great park system and the Riverwalk. But we also want to, make sure that neighborhood organizations on a lower level are still, they have a voice at the table, so that there isn't this ranking or priority. So yes, it's important to us that we have a robust engagement process. So we're taking our time to kind of think creatively, because we know certain things are less effective, like having big workshops, on a Wednesday night. People, they're tired, they might not be able to get a sitter. And so some of the things we've heard of, some people have, childcare at their meetings, or they'll have the meetings in non-traditional locations, like partnering with a small business like San Marcos. So we just want a robust and creative engagement strategy that tries to include voices that haven't previously been heard.
Okay, we've got a couple questions here that have come in. Two from Lance, but I think we can speak to the first one here. Lance Powell is asking, he says, you brought up last week that installing walkways would be a good way to get residents off roads and to get to their parks. What about covering some of the open ditches next to roads with walks and make sure a 10-minute walk is realistic?
Well, the 10-minute walk campaign is more focused on urban areas. I think one of the challenges in this district is a lack of sidewalk connections that would make, having a 10-minute walk to a park always feasible. So I think more likely in the suburban periphery, people have larger regional parks. Like Heritage Park is actually over 20 acres. And it provides a lot of amenities. I was just out there the other day and we upgraded that dog park and it's well used. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the 10-minute walk in this area is not always feasible. Again, in terms of funding and in terms of just having the infrastructure there. So there could be some points where maybe installing a walkway can increase access. But I don't know, David, TPL, you can probably explain better how the walk would apply in this type of area.
Sure. So the 10-minute walk's based off the street network. It does not take into account the pedestrian infrastructure present or not. So it assumes that people walk beside the road, which many people do across our city. And the real issue with that is the size of our city related to the population. Many parts are spread out. And, they were designed to be accessed by personal vehicles. So that's again, speaks to the transportation issues we face, especially in this type of environment. And there's no real easy answer. Do you build more park space? Do you connect existing park space to residents? Both are probably needed, but the resources are not there to be comprehensive and to provide services to the entire city. To that level, that extent, there is the expectation that in many parts of town, people will have to drive to park and recreation facilities.
I'd like to focus back on the specific question that Lance was asking. Those are good answers, certainly about the broader issue, but he's asking specifically about some sort of walking facility in the ditch. Is that something that we've seen in Josh? Maybe you can speak to that from a stormwater facility perspective. Have we seen like an integration of uses in that, like in a channel or in a open conveyance or something like that to make that a usable walking facility? Is that something that we've seen elsewhere?
Yeah, you would see that a lot downtown. I mean, if you come downtown, you know that there's tons of stormwater and sewer. All the utilities are underground there, so you could be walking on top of something. Now it may not be directly on top, like just covering a ditch with a concrete slab. It's going to be in a pipe lower down. But yeah, that does happen. Now, if you start putting things in pipes, then one of the things that you do is you lose the connection to the ground. So if you think about stormwater flowing through a ditch, there is filtration through grass. There is infiltration just through the natural interaction with the ground. The more that you put things in hardscapes, then the more water gets pushed down, and so you create more flooding issues. But that doesn't mean that just because you have a sidewalk on top of a ditch somewhere that you couldn't do it in a way that would be beneficial for both the environment and the pedestrians. I mean, so in some areas it could work for short distances maybe.
Most of the projects I've worked on, we don't necessarily cover up the ditch. Like Lynbrook Park is an area where we're building a park and also doing that stream channel restoration. So there'll be footbridges that cross over the stream, but I haven't been involved in one where we would just cover it up completely. We tend to want to integrate that into the park space.
That's what
I would reference back to say not so much. I'm not talking about just a stream, but I'm thinking more of just a conveyance, like a wet weather conveyance.
Oh, okay.
That's only going to flow. But even then, I mean, if it's right next to to the roadway, like you would see some of those swells, like in a neighborhood. Sidewalks can often be buffered with green space from a roadway, just for that separation from traffic and people, walking along the road. But you're right. If it's a stream, or scores out even as a small scale stream, like the picture you're looking at on the screen now on the upper right corner. I mean, that's clearly a stream, but even low quality or upper watershed streams, headwater streams, we want to protect those as much as possible. Now, when it gets into the ditches, we still want to make sure those are cared for, but there's not the same oversight and regulations from the city and the state for working in and around those.
Okay.
Hey, Eric, if I could just interject real quickly, just wanted to mention that we've had one of our elected officials has joined us online. Councilman Darren Ledford, who represents the East Brainerd area, is a participant tonight. So just want to let you know that they are listening to what you're all saying and asking for. Also, Chris Maybe, one of our planning commissioners, has joined us as a participant. So welcome to both of you guys. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Yes,
thank you. Thanks for being here. Well, if we've got no further questions, I guess we've got a follow-up here from Lance again. This is a kind of an open-ended question. It's not necessarily, you've addressed it, Kosho, here, but I think, Karen, you may be able to speak to this one pretty well, or anybody is welcome to jump in here, but he's asking, how can we educate neighborhoods on how to get things done? I guess that's kind of maybe a broadly area plan engagement question, but I don't know, Karen, do you have thoughts on that question?
Sure, I can jump in. A lot of the things that we try to do during this whole area plan process is to engage with the residents in the neighborhoods and the commercial business owners as well. They're part of the community also. We use social media, we use email lists, we try to get people to our website. We try when we can to get out in the community in person, talking to people with some events. Hopefully we'll get to do some of that next month. It's tough to reach out to get a lot of people involved. Sometimes everybody's busy, especially when this past year, it's been tough to actually gather in person. That's made it even more difficult. But please do, again, if you know people who are not involved in the process, who have not watched any of these panel discussions, who haven't taken our survey, and by the way, please do take our survey. It is now live on our website. There's actually 4 of them. All those are ways that you can get involved and get more informed. We also have an existing conditions report for the East Brainerd area that we've posted on our website that covers a lot of this information and even more. So there are things on transportation, there are things about information about housing and commercial development, as well as a lot of the topics we're talking about tonight. So there's some really good resources for you on our website that we'd love everyone to take a look at. Also, we do have the 4 surveys that are online now. They're going to be open throughout the summer. We're going to try and really make a push after tonight to get people to take the survey. That's a really good way to let elected officials and other city staff know what you'd like to see in your community, because we are going to share all the results of that with them. So those are some of the big things, I think.
Yeah.
What I would say to Lance is that for the master plan, we know there are harder to reach communities. So we feel like it's the city's responsibility also to go out into certain neighborhoods where maybe there isn't that network and help build it. David's been doing a lot of amazing work around Providence Street and Brainerd area, going door to door and sort of building up the network from the ground up. So that's our goal, is that for those neighborhoods that are maybe less empowered, that we do a lot of the legwork to start building some networks, and then hopefully have that continuous engagement even after this project is completed.
That's a great point, Akoshua. For those of you who are watching, if you live in a neighborhood that has a neighborhood association that maybe has regular meetings, get involved. I mean, that's a great way. We try to reach out to all the presidents and leaders of these neighborhood associations. So that's a good way to kind of pull your voices together in your subdivision or neighborhood.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to this plan, again, an area plan is really your best overall vessel for getting meaningful neighborhood change in your built environment, in your neighborhood, or along your road, transportation, all the things that we've said that we're looking at and are going to make recommendations to. Those recommendations are informed by the public input. So this is the vessel by which neighborhoods use their voice to affect change in their area, for the next 10 years. A lot of interesting things have come out of this so far. We've had people mention that they want to see walking paths in certain specific parts of their neighborhood. We're getting feedback from the surveys about what places they'd like to be better connected to or be able to walk or bike to. I know there's been an interesting idea about maybe a potential Greenway connection between Ottoman Acres and Heritage Park. That's kind of a heavy lift, but it's something that we could look at. So there's lots of neat things that can come out of an area plan that are recommendations and then can be later championed and implemented down the road. But it starts with residents and people who live and work there. So
Eric, I was going to add just also for just staying involved in your community in terms of your green spaces and some of the parks and potential greenways. You have outdoor groups that are often involved, like our South Chick Creek Greenway Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
I know up in my area, I'm in Soddy Daisy, we have the North Chick group, we have a Cumberland Trail group, we have worked with Sorba and our bicycle folks who also use these trails. So and it takes several years for an organization to kind of help work to make one of those connections happen or to work towards a park space. But like I said, if you're outdoors oriented, kind of like Josh, like you'll hook up with the same like-minded people, and those are the type of people that we need on committees and at meetings and really pushing and kind of staying with something. And you just will be amazed at the results in the end and then as things progress. So I just want to make sure to say that also.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. That's good.
Yeah.
Well,
for the master plan, I think those groups, they already are engaged and know how to get involved. So we want to make sure that we have their input, but also reach to people who maybe haven't had a voice. So, because again, like you've mentioned, there's benefits, especially in our more underserved communities, of having open space. We realized that, especially during COVID, that there's a lot of less resilient communities. So yes, we want to be as broad as possible though. So you don't want to limit the ways people think they can get involved. There's a lot of ways they can get involved. One is just reaching out directly to me, to their council person, but we want to encourage anybody to feel like they can start tomorrow and get involved in this.
Absolutely. Well, I want to pivot back to talking about flooding, because I know, again, that this is a big issue, and I feel like we owe it to the audience to speak a little bit more on the subject. So I guess this one is probably a little bit more oriented towards Matt and Josh. So as of right now, developers are allowed to build in the floodplain. For better for worse, that's, there's some additional requirements to mitigate flooding if you do build that way, but it's allowed. So and we know that with more impervious surfaces and density increases in some areas, runoff flooding can be concern for people who are already living next to those new developments. So I guess what I want to pose to you is, do you all feel as though our regulations are working as intended, and how might we mitigate or minimize the impact to nearby properties or to the environment with new development should it happen in the floodplain?
Thanks for the easy question, Eric.
Yeah, sorry, not to put you too much on the spot, but
it's and I guess it's probably easier for me to speak to this than Josh, because I'm less involved maybe with the regulation side. But I would say that we probably do need to change our regulations, and as we see to limit not just construction in the floodplain, but it all comes together, you know, and continue to find ways in which to keep that stormwater on the site and get it into the ground and reduce the runoff. And it's going to require a variety of ways. And as we build more things, and your example of the increase in impervious surfaces in this area over the last, whatever those years are, 20 years plus, more than that, it's 86 to it's 40 years. But as we build in any part of the city and we see more things become impervious, and just, you know, forest converted to lawn, the difference in a forest, the amount of water it can take up in a lawn is huge, because lawns aren't really all that pervious either. So when you start to look at that, it's much greater impact than just looking at pervious versus impervious, because lawn gets lumped into pervious, but it really isn't the same. And as we build out more, we're going to have to find more and more tools to keep that water on site and reduce the runoff. And it's going to have to change the way we build and the amount of building that we allow and where we build it. Or the citizens who are there or will be in those new houses are going to continue to suffer. And it's tough, and we're dealing with issues, very complex, with affordable housing, and that adds cost to housing. And so I think we're going to need to look to other areas of the country who have dealt with this. You know, that nothing we're doing is new. We're just experiencing this great benefit of having people want to move here because it's such a great place to live. And we're going to have to start to go out to other places and see how they've dealt with this and how they've dealt with it in a way that's fairest to everybody. And it's going to take, you know, efforts in other departments and ways than just stormwater management, because dealing with these things are going to drive up the cost of housing. So we have to figure out how we can mitigate that cost of housing or provide affordable housing in other places in other ways. So it's a kind of a system-wide approach, I think, that is required. But the short answer is we have to change the way we've been doing things, and it won't be easy, but in the long term we'll benefit by addressing it now and not kind of putting that off and not dealing with that reality. So how's that for an answer that's not really direct?
No, that's good. We want the insight from the private sector, and maybe Josh, you can give the government perspective.
Yeah, I would add to it the thought of the history of stormwater management. If you think that, you know, back in the, you know, the 60s, 70s, nobody was building detention ponds. We didn't even have an NPDES program. That's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That's long terminology for the permit that the city holds, works underneath the state working underneath the federal government, all this trickling down from the Clean Water Act. So we look at stormwater from two different sides. We have water quantity and we have water quality, and then they come together at times in certain aspects with retention ponds, detention ponds. You know, those can have water quality benefits designed primarily for flood control. But looking at the history of how the development has occurred, a lot of our city was built with no stormwater control. And so you see over time, as the science changes and we see the need for additional regulation and controls, that those start to happen. And then early on with detention ponds, a lot of them were undersized, I think, just because the way that calculations were done. And so you have kind of smaller ponds, and then we say, okay, well, we need to do better. We need more. And so the regulation changes. And then you have in 2014, 2015, where we implemented a requirement here at the city for runoff reduction. That's just for the small scale storm event. So the majority of the rain events that happen in Chattanooga are 1 inch or less. That is the storm that we want to control. We want to keep that from running off the site. And so we want it to either be infiltrated into the ground, captured or used, evapotranspiration through plants. But what you have, even with these new regulations, you have all the historical developments that have gone on. So how do we address those? How do we, you know, we don't want to just get, you know, not get worse. We want to turn and get better. And so a lot of that has to do with redevelopment and retrofitting these old sites. And so the city puts together opportunities for people to get fee discounts on their water quality fee for implementing these runoff reduction standards. The city now for 4 or 5 years has been offering the Green Grants program. This last year, we just upped that to a $200,000 grant that we're offering for people who want to do runoff reduction measures. One of the ways that you can do that, removal of impervious surface, right? You take out a hardscape, you open it up to vegetation, you're going to be reducing runoff. And so just kind of wrapping that up, addressing the fact that we have a lot of things that are already in the ground, meaning built environment, not stormwater controls, that need controls. So it's important to recognize that we have to kind of backpedal a little bit and go back to these sites that are already developed and try to do more with what's there.
That's great. Well, and that segues into one more question that I've got for y'all. If we don't have any other from our audience, do we, Karen? Not seeing anything. Okay. Well, we'll just we'll cap it with this, which is you talk about redevelopment and breaking up hardscape. We know there's a lot of pavement around Hamilton Place and along Gun Barrel Road that's used for parking. But we also know a lot of malls and shopping centers like all over the country are starting to bring other kinds of amenities besides shopping to their properties because, you know, brick and mortar retail has been declining. We talked about that in our first panel with commercial development. You know, CBL's doing different kinds of uses like new hotels. They've got their Dave & Buster's and things like that. But have you all seen examples elsewhere of shopping centers, retail places that are bringing parks or natural spaces to kind of add to that, you know, to that retail experience? You know, what did they do? Was it well received? Was it successful? Do y'all have anything that y'all can share on that front?
Personally, I've not been out and around enough to see what other people are doing. I do work with CBL on some of their stuff. I know that I worked with them to retrofit for some water quality units, wasn't flood control. But one of the things that you would look at is on that map that you were showing for the geography, like the layout of the streams. You see Mackey Branch going down. Early on, you had the stream flowing across. It was going from east to west. That's actually Friar Branch, and that yeah. So you don't see it on there where Hamilton Place Mall is. The stream that goes through there is Friar Branch, and the impervious area
analyzed.
Yeah, so it goes underneath 75, and then flows underneath Lee Highway, Shallowford Road, Hickory Valley, and ties into Poe Branch coming down from Volkswagen, all that right there at Sanford Gap Road. And from my analysis of impervious area of just the channel leading over to the mall, that watershed is 60% impervious. So very, very heavy impervious area from all that development. And I know they want to keep those areas available for, you know, for parking, but maybe with the things changing with, you know, more online, less in person, maybe it does open up opportunities to work with them. Even if it was just planting more trees, like tree islands, I think something like that is incredibly useful.
You're talking about in parking lots, kind of.
Yeah, in the parking lot. Yeah, you have a lot of opportunity. Or I will say that you don't need all the hardscape. Some places have done this where they've removed the overflow parking. That's, you know, it's only used a few times a year, and replaced it with some sort of, you know, green pavement. You know, something that's structural enough that you can park cars on it, but it's also just going to be a grid pattern with rocks and grass that would kind of take in the stormwater runoff on unused days.
Right. So approaching it from a different perspective of maybe we've got more parking than we actually need. You know, if you look at some of our big shopping centers on like Black Friday, you know, it's not being filled to capacity. So maybe we actually just have too much parking in some places, in which case that would be, you know, wouldn't be built out to begin with. It might be less more pervious surfaces. So that would help too. Okay. Anybody want to add to that, or any kind of closing remarks or thoughts? I'm going to kind of switch to our next steps and how to stay involved if there's anything else.
I was going to add just a little bit that, I haven't seen necessarily where malls were taken, back to green space per se, but I think one of the kind of trending ways of addressing some of these issues is taking an old mall or something that has a lot of pavement and increasing the density on it, where you are, you have people both living there and they can do all their shopping there and working there as well. So there's less traffic trips and less need for cars for visitors. And inevitably you get more, as you build places for people to live, you get more green, which comes from both the trees and parking lots, but also streetscapes and green streets, kinds of ways of handling that urban stormwater that is both, back to the sidewalk question where you're getting the water in the ground, but it's also, right there beside you, and it's watering the street trees and the things that are keeping you cooler by having the green space adjacent to you. And then just one little thing, when I was in my first year of my first semester of grad school, this guy named Stroud Watson came down and presented to us this amazing presentation. I just thought it was the coolest stuff ever, which included this kind of like transformation of a mall. I'm not sure you all probably know which one. I don't remember which one, but a Chattanooga area mall, from a mall with a bunch of paving to essentially a mixed use development with all these trees and all of those things I just mentioned in it. And that was 1998. So I'm dating myself a little bit.
The Eastgate Mall plan, I think.
Probably, yeah. So it's not a new idea. It's something that he was talking about all that time ago, and I think it'd be great to implement something like that here. It's time.
Yeah, lots of good ideas, lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities too. Thank you all, everybody, for contributing. I'm going to kind of close it out here with where we're at and where we're going. So currently in that third phase in the middle of community choices. Schedule is delayed a little bit with staff changes, but we're back on track. We've got our community choice workshops here in August and maybe at the beginning of September here, where we'll be working on maps. The details are still a little nebulous. We're still working out how exactly we're going to host it. It's probably going to be an open house concept though, so you can come in and lots of different ways to engage and kind of see where we're at with the plan process and provide more input there. And then of course we'll be meeting with a lot of different stakeholders, community groups, business leaders, that sort of thing, to kind of make sure we're on track and hear if there's any concerns or issues going forward with how the plan is developing. We'll be working on the plan document. That's a lot of writing on our part and a lot more research. And then we'll get to that adoption phase where we'll be putting the draft plan out there. There'll be public comment period, and we'll get some more input from our elected officials and planning commissioners. So that's where we're going. And finally, I'm just going to kind of rattle off a couple ways to stay involved here. So as Karen said at the beginning, please subscribe to our email list if you haven't already to get updates on the plan and get feedback. Don't forget to take our surveys. They're available now through the end of August. We might extend that period, but as of right now, that's the plan, is end of August next month. The surveys are supposed to correspond to our panels. So we've already had a housing and commercial development panel. There were 2 corresponding surveys for that. We had our transportation panel and survey, and now we'll have our natural spaces and our natural systems and open spaces survey. So please go take those if you haven't yet. And then of course, please reach out to us if you have any more questions or concerns about anything related to the plan. Maybe you know somebody who wasn't able to attend tonight. Please feel free to shoot us an email at areaplan@chattanooga.gov. And lastly, the YouTube recording of tonight's presentation, you can find that on YouTube at that link below. Travis, if you can stick that in our chat box there so people can click on that. Any other housekeeping, Karen, that you can think of?
I don't think so. Everybody, please do take the survey and tell everyone in East Brainerd to take the survey. By the way, if you know someone who doesn't have internet access or is just not tech savvy, we
Yes.
did leave some paper copies at Jack Benson Heritage Park and at the YMCA, and we'll check those occasionally and replenish them as needed. So
Yes, you can pick up print copies of the surveys there and drop them off back there as well. So we'll make sure we can put that in our next email blast if that's clear to people. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. Thanks especially to our experts for their time and expertise, and thank you to my person for emptying my trash and recycle here. Hey, you're good. He's cleaned up for me. Thank you. No, you're good. You're good. So have a great evening, everyone. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
All right,
Good
thank
night.